Hi, as promised, this is part two of the of me reading parts of accounts from tourists who went to Egypt from roughly 1600s to or through the 19th century. Like I said in the last video, I'll be largely dealing with Western tourists, but I do have some Muslim or Arabic writings in the mix as well. And if you want to kind of dive deeper into the larger social and political themes and context behind this, watch my part one video that goes into more depth there. That video, as well as this one, part two, and then part three, will also have in the description box a list of secondary sources, the majority of which I've read as well, that I've found helpful in tangling those or in detangling those larger social and political currents. So our last account was from an Arabic source. So now we are jumping ahead in time to the 1600s, and this time it is a Western source. So the first part of the title is a voyage into the Levant. This was written by Sir Henry Blount, who went to Egypt in the early 1600s, and I got this publication from Merritt Segar Books. And the overall theme for this first part is how did people get to Egypt and where did they land once they got there? So that's the kind of theme that these excerpts are going to be organized around for this part two video. The next morning we departed for Alexandria of Egypt, accompanied with 10 ordinary galleys of Rhodes. And this speaks to something that is basically a common theme for basically anyone who came to Egypt from or roughly before, say, 1700-ish and probably like 1730s, 1750-ish. They actually came into Alexandria first, and then if they were going to go on to Cairo as well, they did that later on. So the older accounts, almost all of them, if not all of them, have the traveler using or basically situating Alexandria as kind of the first access point to Egypt, which went to be fold for sea well. The weather, although right and stern, grew so high as the 3 old galleys perished, 2 in the night with all their people, the third by day in our sight. And if you look at that word sight, it speaks to something else that I talked about in part one, which is that sometimes what looks like an F is an S, sometimes it is an F. So this is a word where the F is actually an S. But despairing by times made up to a galleon near ours and saved such of her men who were neither chained nor otherwise encumbered. After 3 days full sail, we arrived in port. Alexandria, built by Alexander the Great, was after beautified by many, but especially by Pompey. It bears yet the monuments of its ancient glory. Pillars in great number and size, both above ground and below, most of porphyry and other marble as firm. The ancient Egyptians had a custom now not in use, that was to make as great a part of the house beneath ground as above. That below was the most costly, with pillars and rich pavements for refreshment being their summer habitation. The upper part had the vaster pillars for show, but not the neatest. Above all the rest, there are three far beyond any that I ever saw elsewhere. That of Pompey, where his ashes were laid upon the rocky shore, hard by where he was slain in a boat at sea. It is round, all of one stone, kind of reddish gray marble, so wonderfully vast, as made me salute his memory with the poet's prophet, prophet call, Hail, Templis Iroquois, Sepultus Ville or Umbra for A's. It stands upon a four-square rocky foundation on the south side of the town without the walls. Within on the north, towards the sea, are two square obelisks, each of one entire stone full of Egyptian hieroglyphs. The one standing, the other fallen. I think either of them thrice as big as that at Constantinople or the other at Rome, and therefore left behind as too heavy for transportation. Near the obelisks are the ruins of Cleopatra's palace. This next account also comes from the 1600s. So, from what I could get of the title page, it was published in 1615, but apparently the author, George Sandys, was actually in Egypt in 1610, and I got this from Merit Seger Books as well. Now, having lost the sight of roads, we saw no land until the third night after, in the evening, doubtfully discovering the coast of Egypt. Fearing the lee shore, all night we bore out to sea, the lightning ministering uncomfortable light intermixed with thunder and tempests. The next day we entered, and I'm not sure what this word is exactly, but maybe it's because I'm reading it as Han, but maybe that's a word at that time for port, of Alexandria, newly defamed with a number of wrecks, which scattered here and there did miserably testify the unsafe protection of that harbor. For not past 2 nights before, the northern winds beating full upon the mouth of the Han, with violent seas drove the foremost ships from their anchors, who falling foul on the rest sunk all for company, even 22 in number. Among the rest, that great and warlike ship called the Red Lion, but taken the year before from the Knights of Malta. This next account comes from 1701, also from Merit Seger Books. So we're jumping ahead in time to the very beginning of the 18th century here. Having disposed of our Moors and a little recruited ourselves, we put out again for Alexandria, accompanied with another great Dutch vessel, and entered the port after 19 days' sail, without observing anything remarkable. And then this is his description of part of his description of Alexandria. It's very pleasantly seated in a plain, and the old double walls flanked with towers are still standing, but the city within is considerably decayed, and most of the sumptuous palaces entirely ruined. The walls and gates are said to be the same that Alexander built, though the Coptic and Arabic inscriptions show them to have been the works of diverse caliphs. In St. Catherine's Church, we saw a marble pillar on which they say that saint's hand was cut off. In the ancient Church of St. Mark, served by the Coptes, that is the word for or was the word, and I think still is the main designations for the strain of Christianity that grew up in Egypt. In St. Catherine's Church, we saw a marble, by the Copts. They showed us the famous pulpit in which St. Mark, St. Athanasius, and Origen are said to have preached, and which is had in great veneration by the Christians of those parts, as likewise a picture of St. Michael the Archangel said to have been made by St. Luke. We also saw the ruins of St. Catherine's father's palace, with diverse marble pillars and obelisks with their hieroglyphics still entire. The city may have, as nigh as we could guess, about 8 miles in length, but in diverse places it's very narrow. This next account comes from a Frenchman that traveled to Egypt the tail end of the 1700s, and part of the purpose of his work was to try to convince the French government to devote resources towards making Egypt a formal French colony. And the translation of the work that I got it from was printed in London in 1800, and I found it on the Internet Archive. The making of Alexandria is also attended with danger, this part of Egypt being so low that it cannot be approached without great caution. On coming from the side of Libya, the first landmark on the coast of Egypt is Abu Sir, called by the Europeans Towers of the Arabs. These are 2 heights, on each of which stands a tower. They may be discovered 4 leagues off at sea. One of these towers is round, the other is square. At least this is the appearance under which they presented themselves to me when I saw them from the offing. It should seem, however, that their forms differ from those which I attribute to them, for Granger, who appears to have visited these buildings, describes them in a different manner. 2 harbors, especially spacious, present themselves to ships that intend to anchor near Alexandria. The one which is to the westward of the city is called the Old Port. Its entrance is a little difficult on account of 2 sandbanks, which leave only a narrow channel between them. But the inside is a deep basin, kept in good order and completely sheltered from bad weather. The other, which is to the eastward, and which is separated from it by a peninsula of little breadth, has received the name of the New Port. It is shallow, encumbered by a great number of rocks and shoals, and is entirely open to northerly winds. If after this any one were to suppose that the latter port is little frequented, he would be deceived. Fanaticism here prevailed over the real interest of the inhabitants. While the Alexandrians willingly mixed with the Europeans in commercial transactions, they denied to European ships the means of carrying on, without risk, a trade from which they derived so much advantage. The vessels of the followers of Muhammad alone had a right to enter the old harbor, and those of other nations might have perished for want of a safe retreat, before they could obtain permission to penetrate into a place subject to such foolish and impolitic restrictions. Ships of war which require deep water are obliged to anchor as soon as they have doubled the diamond and the 2 dry sandbanks, in other words, quite at the entrance of the port. The Atlantic, that's the ship that this particular author came in on, or the Atlanti, passed more than a month in this manner, laboring in a constant swell, an uneasy position which I rather chose to participate with my friends than to take up my quarters on shore, as I was at liberty to do, since I was to remain in Egypt. This infamous port is still fuller of rocks on the eastern side. As ships cannot approach it, all debarkation is there impractical. We endeavored in vain to land with a boat, intending to visit the obelisks which are on that side, and had well nigh been lost in consequence of the agitation of the water, which dashed the boat repeatedly and with great violence against the stones. This is a work from the 1750s. So we're kind of going back in time a little bit in the 18th century, and it's by Sir Frederick Norden. Norden and Pocock were the two of the main Europeans that went to Egypt in the 1750s, 1760s, and they went with the aim of recording the monuments as they saw them. And I got this version from the Internet Archive. The Old and New Port at this time at Alexandria are what they formerly called the ports of Africa and of Asia. The first is reserved for the Turks, the second is open to the Europeans. They differ the one from the other in this, that the old is much more neat and has much deeper water than the new, where they are obliged to put at certain distances empty casks under the cables, that they might not be fretted and worn by the bottom, which is stony. But if this precaution preserves the cables, the vessels are still always exposed to the risk of being lost. The anchor not holding so well in this manner, a tempestuous wind easily loosens the vessel, which, when once it drives, is cast away even in the harbor, because it has not sufficient room nor sufficient depth to make its anchor hold again. A French vessel was lost in this manner the year before my arrival at Alexandria. The entrance of the new port is defended by two castles of a bad Turkish structure, and which have nothing remarkable but their situation, since they have succeeded edifices very renowned in history. And then Norden has put a drawing, which in both his work and in Pocock's are referred to as plates of the harbor of Alexandria and the entrance as it was in his day here. After having landed, we crossed the new town and took the route of the obelisk, where we did not arrive till after having clambered over ruined walls, which give, through a tower of stonework, a free passage, quite to the foot of that antique monument. And no sooner have you approached it than you see, on one side, another, which has long since been obliged to give way, and is at present almost entirely bare. Read. Now we are heading into the 19th century. So we're going to, or I'm going to start in the 1820s. This is an account by a woman who was in a larger scholarly party. So her husband was an early Egyptologist / antiquarian. So this is kind of her side of the account of their scholarly researches and trips and explorations in Egypt. And I got it from the Library of Congress. So much has been written upon Egypt within these few years that it may appear presumptuous in a female to think of adding to the number of books of travel the ancient dominions of the pharaohs and Ptolemies. But if the recollections which I offer to the public in the following pages do not tend to enrich science and archaeology, they may perhaps interest persons of my own sex, who, when they learn that a woman has visited, under fortunate auspices, those distant regions as far as the tropic, will not be averse to follow her in excursions, and to accompany her in the contemplation of so many wonders of ancient civilization. Not being prepared, however, for this journey, which I undertook a short time after my marriage, I had, like the generality of women who live in the bustle of the great world, but very superficial notions of the countries I was going to visit. I therefore felt the necessity of making up for this deficiency by the assistance of my husband's library. And during our voyage by sea and our expedition in Upper Egypt, I diligently read Herodotus, Volney, Den Jan, Hamilton, and several other authors, whose works were very useful to me by extending and rectifying my ideas and enhancing the interest I took in the scenes I was to view. So now they've done their ship journey and they're arriving at the port of Alexandria. At length we entered the port, which was covered with a forest of masts decorated with the colors of different commercial nations. This scene, so new and interesting to me, was illuminated by the dazzling beams of an unclouded sun. The sea, reflecting the azure sky, seemed of the color of lapis lazuli, which is particularly grateful to the sight, and forms a singular contrast with the yellow hue of an arid and sandy coast. Alexandria, with its ruins and gray, flat-roofed houses, resembles at a distance a town laid waste by the enemy. Everything here recalls the lapse of ages, and nature, as if to second the solemn impression which we feel at the recollection of so much past greatness, presents to the eye of a traveler only the sands of the desert. To the left of the city extends the desert which leads to Rosetta. To the right, the great desert of Bear with the exception of some solitary palms, which at a distance look like insulated pillars, no trace of vegetation is perceived on the coast. Now I am moving to the 1840s by an account published by an American in Egypt that I got from the Library of Congress. So again, Alexandria is still one of the main modes of entering Egypt, but it's just in the beginning stages of starting to lose that a bit. And this is also, by the time you get to the 19th century, most of the accounts and the first page of each chapter tends to follow this model, where it gives you the chapter number and it gives you basically one sentence summaries of what that chapter is going to talk about, and they kind of do they do less and less of those internal footnotes that you saw in the earlier accounts. The next morning we were threading our winding way through the dangerous entrance to the harbor of Alexandria. I came on deck and found all hands in the suds, scraping and cleaning every part of it, scouring the guns and rubbing the rigging, that all things might appear to the best advantage when in port. They commenced this operation of the ship's ablution and deck scraping over our heads about 4 o'clock in the morning, and so thorough and determined was the process of washing and scouring that part of the boat, that all efforts at repose were ineffectual, and sleep was quite out of the question, of course. The moon was still bright, deep in the vault of heaven, and the morning star, twinkling brilliantly in the east, led on by one of lesser light, though not less beautiful, gave a peculiar charm and sweetness to the mellow-tinted sky, as the first gush of aurora poured along the eastern horizon. A low, long, circling coast of sand, rising occasionally into gentle hillocks, dotted with motionless windmills, stretched away in the distance on the right, while an outline glimpse of some of the principal edifices of Alexandria was obtained through the towering mast of the Turkish and Egyptian fleets, blending with the distant view of Pompey's Pillar and Cleopatra's Needle, leaning against the richly burnished sky and producing altogether one of those incomparably beautiful and lovely landscape views which are rarely witnessed in nature, and reminding one most forcibly of those poetic and inestimable touches of Salvator Rosa, seen nowhere else in such glorious perfection as in Italy. The Morning, though bright and lovely at first, became overcast, and soon the rain descended in torrents. This quite astonished us, for somehow or other, from what we had read, dreamed, or heard from the lecturing lips of Eastern travelers, a notion had crept into our heads that it never rains in Egypt. The floods, however, came down as if the very windows of heaven had been opened, drenching through and through everything that was exposed to its pitiless peltings, putting a damper upon our false sunny ideas, and correcting an impression which, we found in our subsequent rambles, was no less erroneous than many others that we had gathered from the poetic lectures of a gentleman who has thrown down such a shower of eloquence upon the inhabitants of the New World, by way of enlightening their weak understandings in regard to the wonders of the old. And apparently that gentleman was J.S. Buckingham, who I guess, according to this, was an ex-member of Parliament. We began to think that we should probably meet little else than Arabs, and even felt some uneasiness about finding a comfortable shed on shore for our heads. Thus imaginary difficulties had piled themselves up in our minds, to a height scarcely less than that of an Egyptian pyramid, when several boats from the town came alongside of the steamer, with servants dis- distributing the cards of the hotels of Alexandria, printing in Italian, French, and English. We had no sooner thrown out the anchor than several of these agents from the home of the stranger came on board, each soliciting our patronage for his particular hotel, all of whom could speak Italian and French, and one of them spoke pretty good English. Difficulties vanished as if by magic. A load of borrowed trouble rolled from our minds. We cast the bugbears overboard, shut our eyes against all thoughts of the plague, and began to feel ourselves as much at ease in that mysterious and distant part of the world as if we'd been standing on the rock of the Puritans in our own green forest land. This next account comes from the 1850s. I think it's by a British traveler, and I got it from the Library of Congress. And part of the reason why I picked this account is because it's referenced in later accounts of other travelers as a good one to kind of read and get the lay of the land. So a lot of the assumptions that kind of are within this account seemed to have found agreement within at least a wide number kind of people of the British Empire. Towards evening on the 18th day since leaving England, so this gentleman also came in through Alexandria. The lowland of Egypt was visible from the masthead. A heavy gale had been blowing ever since our departure from Malta, and though a brilliant sun was shining, foam clouds swept the decks, converted into rainbows as they passed. Not a sail appeared upon those lonely seas that once swarmed with navies of war and commerce. The only object visible from the deck was a faint speck run upon the horizon, but that speck was Pompey's Pillar. All that is now visible within the shrunken and moldering walls is a piebald town, one half European, with its regular houses, tall and white and stiff, the other half Oriental, with its mud-colored buildings and terraced roofs, varied with fat mosques and lean minarets. These suburbs are encrusted with the wretched hovels of the Arab poor, and immense mounds and tracts of rubbish occupy the wide space between the city and its walls. All beyond is a dreary waste. Yet this is the site Alexander selected from his wide dominions, and which Napoleon pronounced to be unrivaled in importance. Here luxury and literature, the Epicurean and the Christian, philosophy and commerce once dwelt together. Here stood the great library of antiquity, the assembled souls of all that men held wise. Here the Hebrew scriptures expanded into Greek under the hands of the Septuagint. Here Cleopatra, vainqueur des vainqueurs du monde, reveled with her Roman conquerors. Having taken this general view of our first Egyptian city, i.e. Alexandria, let us enter it in in a regular manner to view it in detail. The bay is crowded with merchant vessels of every nation, among which tower some very imposing looking three-deckers, gigantic but dismantled, the red flag with the star and crescent flying from the peak. Men of war barges shoot past you with crews dressed in what look like red nightcaps and white petticoats. They rise to their feet at every stroke of the oar and pull all out of time. Here, an ocean patriarch, as the Arabs call Noah, with white turban and flowing beard, is steering a very little ark filled with unclean looking animals of every description. And they are a crew of swarthy Egyptians, naked from the waist upward, are pulling some pale faced strangers to a vessel with loosened topsails and blue peter flying. We embarked on a canal boat. There is now a steamer. And I think at this point in the account, they are either on their way to Cairo, or they're basically like they're definitely done seeing Alexandria, and they're going further into Egypt. And passed for some miles along a causeway that separates the saltwater Lake Madi from Lake Mareotis. Nothing can be more desolate than the aspects of these two lonely lakes, stretching with their low, swampy shores away to the horizon. They seem to have been born for one another, though the pharaohs, like poor law guardians, saw fit to separate them. Their object, however, the reverse of the said poor law, being to render Mareotis prolific. A vast mound was raised, which kept the salt lake at a respectful distance, and until the English invasion in 1801, or at least until the 18th century, the greater part of Mareotis was a fertile plain. It was midnight when we arrived at Atifa, the point of junction with the Nile, and a regular African storm, dark and savage, was howling among the mud-spilt houses when we disembarked there, ankle deep in slime, a crowd of half-naked, swarthy Arabs with flaring torches looked as if they were Pluto's police, ready to escort us to the realms of darkness, jabbering and shouting violently, in chorus with the barking of the wild dogs, the roaring of the wind, and the growling of the camels, as a hailstorm of boxes and portmanteaus were showered on their backs. Donkeys were braying, women shrieking, Englishmen cursing sonorously, and the lurid moon, as she hurried through the clouds, seemed a torch waved by some fury to light up this scene of infernal confusion. This next text also comes from the 1850s. The first part of its title is A Pilgrimage to Egypt, and I got it from Library of Congress. Port of departure for the East. It is if it is the intention of the tourist to enter Egypt or Syria, the point to sail from is Naples. A steamer may be taken on the 3rd and 20th of each month at Southampton, which goes from England to Alexandria, calling at Gibraltar and Malta, constituting the overland line to India. The vessels are staunch, well-found, and safe conveyances, but their route is a rough, tedious way, and far more expensive than it should be, besides being a monotonous one. Taking the other or inland course by first going to France and finally sailing from Marseille or Naples, some useful experience is acquired, and separately from the gratification afforded by the contemplation of the works of art in that direction, there's actual economy in it. The only reason why the cost would be more by land than by sea would be through the filchings of American consuls for a visa of a passport. On no account presume to enter Egypt in the summer. From the latter part of October to the 1st of January is a decidedly favorable period. The weather is not hot beyond endurance within that range of time. Cool breezes from the north blow up the Nile, and if a design is entertained of ascending that river, reliance can be placed on a daily trade wind that rarely fails for more than a single day to exert its force in that direction, south for several months in succession. With the return of spring, the wind shifts and blows from the south with equal certainty. If the route is taken from the north, and the traveler first explores Syria before arriving in Egypt, which on the whole is the preferable way, he should reach Constantinople or Beirut about the middle of September, which will allow sufficient opportunity for a jaunt through Palestine, reaching Cairo by way of Ramla through the desert. So you can see here in that hint that Cairo, by the time this account was written, was more and more becoming the city of entry for Western travelers rather than Alexandria. In commencing a line of travel at this point, the explorations would be completed before the annual rains set in, which are violent, cold, and uncomfortable to endure. The streams are frequently swollen so that they cannot be forded with safety at that season. As it rarely rains in Egypt above Alexandria in the winter, no interruptions by bad weather are to be anticipated. On the other hand, if after finishing a tour in Egypt, the traveler arrives in the midst of rains at Jerusalem, there must necessarily be a loss of time by delays for clear sky, a larger bill of expenses for an outfit, and a higher rate would be demanded for the use of horses or camels. We arrived at Alexandria, so in this case, this author didn't go by land, but took one of the steamer options to Alexandria first. We arrived at Alexandria on the first day of November from Malta when the cholera had begun to wane. Yet strangers were greatly in fear of its pestilential influence. No regard was paid to it whatever by us. And then I'm skipping ahead a line. The board is a distinct charge in the Mediterranean steamers, while the passage is another, and the service of each and all the waiters still another. It is therefore more expensive traveling in any line of steamboats on the Mediterranean than by the same conveyances either in England or America. Before we had fairly stepped out of the boat, an immense rabble of carriers, peddlers, idlers, and donkey drivers, backing their little stubborn brutes plump into our faces, beset us at every comeatable point. One urged the good qualities of his saddle, another declared it was too far to walk uptown, and 100 more were shouting, screaming, and bellowing in broken English all kinds of information which was of no earthly importance. While this confusion was at its height, our luggage was borne off to the custom house for examination. A small fee was paid to the faithful inspectors, who never troubled themselves to look an inch beyond the stratum at the top. The first lesson was here learned, that no officer of the government in the East is beyond the magical influence of a bribe. From the man nearest to the throne to a mendicant in the streets, baksheesh, meaning a present, is all powerful. An Arab or a Turk will serve the devil as readily as Allah or the Grand Sultan if he has paid his price. Every requisition being compiled with, the Pasha's inspecting revenue officers bribed to let us pass, knowing every delay would be made in the examination if we did not put a few piastres into their hands, although there was not a single dutiable or contraband article in a possession. A bevy of contending half-naked Arab boys lashed our trunks, bags, coats, and traveling gear to the sides of the donkeys, so that the poor little things were almost concealed by their loads. And away we sped to the consular square, the focus of civilization, hotels, and paper lanterns. Should the traveler be on his route to India, he would not be subjected to these annoyances, as the overland transit company take charge of his effects, which are merely transferred to camels, or in part to a long flat on carriage wheels, starting from the square, conveying the whole to a small steamer at the mouth of the canal that reaches the Nile. This next account is from the 1860s, and I got it from Library of Congress. Southampton, one of the most agreeable of England's seaports, is the locality selected by the Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company for the departure and return of the important fleet they own, and which connects us with our Indian possessions. And that Peninsular and Oriental Steam Company is something that you will see abbreviated in a lot of the guidebooks as the P&O. As this is the quickest and most direct mode of reaching Egypt, we will conduct the traveler out this way, leaving his return provided for in a way to be detailed at the close of this volume. And then these are the rates of passage money. I forget which exact stage of the steam journey it is. So I think this maybe is like starting from Southampton. So from Southampton to these places, these are the prices, with, of course, the attendant different classes that they had at that time. 3 days more of lonely sea, and then the coast of Egypt comes in view. It is flat, marshy, and unpicturesque. It resembles Holland, and is garnished with long lines of windmills, after the Dutch manner. The minarets of the city of Alexandria shoot up from the sandy flat, and as we get near it, the double bay, the Pharos, and the high ridge of land upon which stand Pompey's Pillar come in sight. Our vessel anchors in the port of Ostis, opposite the Pasha's palace, an extensive but by no means picturesque pile. It is vitiated by an imitation of European taste, and is entirely wanting in true Asiatic character. The harbor has a busy look, crowded as it is with ships of all nations. Our vessel is now boarded by shoals of dirty, clamorous natives, all eager for employment. Portage or porterage. Such passengers as go once by rail to Cairo en route to the east go on or get on another steamer, which carries them across the harbor to the railway. This next account is from the 1860s, and part of the reason that I picked it is because this traveler saw Egypt in a dia, so in a boat that actually went up and down the Nile, and I got it from Library of Congress as well. The best time for seeing this country depends much on circumstances, but under any should be from 1st October, when the Nile recedes from its full height, to 1st April, when it gets too low, and contrary winds set in. The usual time is between the 1st of November and the 1st of March. If the traveler is an invalid, I should advise him not to postpone the commencement of a 3 months' voyage to Second Cataract beyond middle of November, so as to get as far south enough to be beyond the reach of the cool nights of December and January in Lower Egypt, which in a Nile boat reduce the temperature often as low as 50 degrees towards morning till sunrise. The mercury rapidly rises by noon to 65 or 70, where it remains till sunset and slowly declines. There are no conveniences for stoves inside, but foot warmers filled with hot water, and warm robes for an hour or two in the morning or very late in the evening will generally answer all purposes. A stove or vessel to burn coals would be a nuisance with excessive heat, gas, and smoke. Nearly everyone going to Egypt in a diaba spends most of his time on the Nile, either for health or pleasure, varying from 2 to 4 months. The expense of living in Cairo or on a Nile boat is from 75 to 100% greater than that laid down in the old guidebooks. The hotels in Cairo now charge $4 a day and other things in proportion. A voyage up the Nile for 5 or 6 persons will cost $6 to $7 a day, and for 3 or 4, about $9 each. This includes the hire of boat, crew, captain, steersman, cook, boy, and an additional cook and waiters for the party, besides all provisions except wines. It also embraces the wages of the dragomen and all the hire of donkeys, saddles, guides, guards, and even the bakshish or gifts to all persons, including that to the crew, captain, servants, etc. It is customary to put this into the contract with the dragoman, who provides the whole at a stated price by the month or the trip. It is proper to mention that Egyptian passenger steamers now make the trip of the Nile from Cairo to Aswan and back in 20 days, giving brief stoppages at certain places that they choose to fix upon. The cost is about £42 the trip, including meals. They are very comfortable and are fitted up to accommodate about 40 first-class passengers. Only those take them who wish to economize either time or money, for they do not allow time enough for the requisite sightseeing, nor provide sufficient donkeys, guides, saddles, and etc. And I think I am going to stop there, at least for right now. And part 3 will be the rest of where you would first land, and I'll probably after that do other parts as well. See you until next time.